everybody. So help me welcome. Thank you. Help me welcome Mr. Fanimo Opayemi, who is also a financial expert, who will be taking us on how to spend our finances and why we shouldn't overspend, right? Good evening, Mr. Opayemi. Thank you so much for accepting our invite. The mic is yours. You could please go ahead.
Everyone, and welcome. So, just as the invitation to the webinar indicated, today or this evening we'll be going over the psychology of spending, understanding why you overspend and how to stop it. So, if you're here this evening, I'm guessing you're here for a variety of, you could be here for a variety of reasons, but I think it's safe to assume that you want to get an understanding of how how better you can manage your finances, identifying the areas that need to be improved, the areas where maybe you overshoot your intention to spend, and finding ways to optimize that sort of behavior so you are better able to manage your finances. So, just a brief introduction. I don't know, maybe I should defer to my fellow co-hosts. I would prefer if this session is interactive, so I can see the chat section. So, if you have any questions, any clarifications, any contributions, you can just leave a message and I'll try to address it. I believe that should be fine. I don't know if the guests have the opportunity to unmute to ask questions directly, but I believe they can leave their comments in the chat. So we'll get right into it. Of course, I want to assume most of us in this, or maybe I shouldn't assume that everyone on this call is Nigerian or familiar with the Nigerian terrain in terms of uh, macroeconomic and microeconomic conditions, right? But I'm sure even if you're not Nigerian, wherever you're joining from, whether it's across the continent or beyond the continent, I'm sure you can understand the encompassing concept of expenses, right? Basically, the spend that comes after you earn, sometimes even before you earn, right? And I'm sure you will agree that it's very easy for you to be caught in a web of expenses because in as much as you are a part of the society in some form or the other, you are part of the intricate framework that form our social structures. You're part of the economy one way or the other. As you earn, you spend. As you earn, taken from the economy, you also put back into the economy by spending. It's a continuous cycle. But within that cycle, because there are so many options, there are so many things going on at the same time, it becomes increasingly complicated, especially as you go older. You have new goals, you have new objectives, you have new spheres that you interact in. So there are a whole bunch of different things happening at the same time, and it's very easy for you to lose track. So what we're just covering within this session, we'll try to together identify some of the common triggers, things that set off the behavior, the sort of overspending behavior that you would want to address, some of the psychological factors that inform overspending behavior, and the cultural influences as well. So, in looking through some of these factors and triggers and influences, we'll also move further to exploring ways for you to regain control so you can build a financial future that aligns with your own goals and values. Now, this presentation is quite contextualized around the Nigerian environment, right? But I believe it should still apply even if you're joining us or if you're listening in from within a different territory. Or maybe I should even start from there. Maybe you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from, so I just have an idea of what the audience is like. So if you don't mind, if you could just drop a message so I just have an idea where you're joining from. think we have Joel on the call, Emiana, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, or maybe perhaps Ugochukwu would be your first name. Oh, you're joining from Lagos. That's Manuel. Thank you very much. Lagos, Nigeria, I'm assuming. I believe there's another Lagos. Is it Italy or Portugal? Sorry, I'm a bit behind on my geography. So I'll assume it's Lagos, Nigeria. Joel Gochuku, I'm not sure where you're joining from. From your names, I believe to a large extent, at least Ugochukwu, I would assume you're Nigerian. Okay, yes, Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much. Joel, sorry, I can't exactly assume. I'm not exactly multilingual, so I can't place exactly where you're coming from, but I believe if you're not joining us from Nigeria, you should still be able to relate to some of the concepts that we'll be discussing. So now, just to give a bit of context to the Nigerian reality specifically, right? I'm sure we're all aware of the current economic situation, right? The the end of the fuel subsidy regime, the collapse of the foreign exchange windows, devaluation of of Nigerian currency, and the ripple effects it had on the economy. Right, we are still a very import-dependent society. So what that means is because we consume more than we are able to produce, we import, and a lot of our importation, even a lot of our income as a country is foreign exchange driven, right? So of course, all those changes in the foreign exchange markets, even they have the ripple effect, they impact us directly. What that has meant for you and I on a day-to-day basis is we're seeing that most of the things we buy, the prices are going up, right? Sometimes ridiculous proportions. You go to the market one day, you're buying this item for maybe 1,000 naira, you go in the next day and suddenly it's 2,000. You go in a day after that, it could be 2,300, 2,500, and it just doesn't feel like it's slowing down. At least that was for a period. I believe now there's still a sense of stability, but you can agree with me that the prices and the current market realities that we're facing now are quite different from what they were 5, 10 years ago, right? And this is especially intense for those of us that are young adults, because you are just either getting your start into the formal economy as a professional, or you're still, getting your foot in the working environment. You're not exactly fully established, and even if you were, you're still trying to build a life, right? So you're definitely going to feel the pinch. So, and when you have such a difficult environment, it's definitely going to result in stress, right? I'm sure we all understand the concept of stress, if not from the psychological perspective, from the layman. When people tell you you look stressed, you seem stressed, right? It's a condition of agitation, right? Where your mental state, your physical state is under considerable burden. There are some physiological factors that go along with that. You don't feel relaxed. You can literally feel the tension sometimes, right? You might think to yourself, what is the relation between feeling the physical representations of stress and what is happening in the economic environment? But the truth of the matter is, you in making your spending choices, in earning and in spending, right? There's a lot of thought in most cases that go into it. You find yourself now, you have to rethink choices that maybe perhaps once upon a time it wasn't something you had to think much about, because they were still within the range of affordability, right? And now we find ourselves in states where certain critical milestones that are typical of certain stages of your life, they now seem out of reach. We're talking things like owning a car, um, renting a decent apartment, or even maybe putting down some sort of payments towards owning one, right? beginning your family and the other expenses and costs that come with it, supporting your extended family, things around that nature is becoming more and more difficult, right? Even pursuing educational opportunities is becoming more and more difficult because the rate at which the costs around us are going up, it's not direct proportionally match the rate at which your income in most cases for grows as well. So there's a sort of disconnect, right? The average Lagosian, based on some reports, spends about 50,000 naira monthly on non-essentials. Non-essentials in the sense that these are items that are not particularly required for your, they are not considered necessities, right? Things along food, shelter, and clothing, things outside of that that are not particularly required for you to live or survive as an individual, things that are more based on discretion. We're talking about maybe things like you want to buy fashion items, right? You want to splurge on a vacation or some sort of accessory, things that you can that you don't necessarily have a pressing need for. It's more of a want than an actual need, right? So the truth of the matter is, yes, there is a mindset around you don't have to seem like your circumstances. Things can be hard, but you should still, take care of yourself, you still enjoy yourself. But if you don't plan properly around it, you run the risk of significantly eroding your financial health, right? Because then you keep spending, but you don't have an understanding of where that money is going. It just feels as if the money comes in and it just comes out just as fast, right? It's a very vicious cycle, and as terrible as it sounds, it's not hopeless. That's part of the reason why this webinar is happening, and thankfully you are in here as well to learn and take advantage so you can take better control of your finances, right? So, in as much as inflation is eroding our purchasing power, making it more difficult for most people to attain a certain decent standard of living, right? Because as those prices keep going up, your money is able to buy less. Maybe once upon a time you were able to buy, just to contextualize it in a typical local demand, you're able to afford to buy a bag of rice within a 3 month cycle. But now you find that the price point is way outside of your range, so you have to cut down. Maybe you're buying a quarter of a bag and trying as much as possible to stretch it for a 6 month period, right? So it makes it difficult. Or you want to buy a car, or you want to rent an apartment, but because of how much it costs, the fact that the prices and costs have gone up so high is making it difficult for you to meet your particular goals in terms of those areas. Then beyond even the things that you want to get, I'm sure you might have also set some certain financial goals for yourself in terms of how much savings you have, how much investments you have. But savings and investments are more of there is a link between that and your expenses. What you are able to save and invest is less what you spend, right? You cannot spend something and still have it to save it or invest. So the more inflation keeps going up and the more the prices keep going up and the more you have to dedicate more of your income to towards the things that you want or you need, the harder it becomes for you to meet whatever financial goals that you might have set. So where how exactly or how deep does this problem go, right, in terms of overspending? Now, before we go into some of the effects and some of the things that overspending, some of the hidden costs, the things that happen underneath the surface that you might not necessarily take note of until it becomes a bigger issue. I just want to also make it clear, although I think I've given a bit of context to it. Overspending in this regard could be into different, you could look at it in different ways because yes, let's say in a typical month you spend about 50,000, and let's say you're earning about 250,000, and in a typical month before now, maybe 3 4 years ago, you spend about 50,000. That would cover most of your essential expenses, and most of the 200,000 is enough for you to apportion to things like savings, investment, and non-discretionary spending. But because of the economic situation now, you find yourself spending up to 180K um just to cover your basic needs, right? In that case, while your spend has gone up, is it truly overspending? Because your quality of life might not necessarily have gone up. It's just the state of the things around you. So that's one end of the overspending. The other end is that you yourself, you're not taking note of the differences between what you need and what you want, and you are actually spending or apportioning from your finances more than you should, or that is realistically sustainable based on your current capacities, right? So it's very important to make that distinction before we go into some of the hidden costs that come along that accompany states of overspending. The first one I alluded to when I started this presentation, the health impact. I mentioned things around stress, and it has both the mental repercussions and as well as the physical repercussions, because it is a biological state as much as it is a psychological state. When you are stressed, you might find it difficult to think clearly. You find it difficult to express to experience positive emotions because you are under significant pressure, right? When most people think about health, they think about it from the physical aspect, the headache part of the stress, the body ache, the tiredness, the fatigue. But there is also the mental aspect, right? The constant anxiety, the feelings of low mood, depression, because you are constantly worrying about money, right? It has a way of pulling down on your health because there is an inextricable link between the way you feel mentally up there and the way and the physical state of your body, right? The mind and the body, they are linked in very complex and very real ways, right? So of course, if you're overspending and you're starting to see the financial repercussions, you're going to be affected on a mental and physical level. So, and there's a saying that your health is your wealth. Now, you could look at it from the paradoxical view that what it means in terms of the metaphor, but even in real terms, right? Because it's a very, very difficult thing to try to address a health concern, especially in this sort of environment, right? The same way all those other costs, things that pertain to your day to day, like maybe electricity, utilities, your transportation, all those costs, the same way things pertaining to health in terms of medication, in terms of consulting, being able to meet with a medical health professional, admissions, all those things, the prices have also gone up. So if you overspend to the point that it starts to tell on you on a physical and mental level, then you start worrying, you start jeopardizing your health, and then you still have to spend to address that as well. So it becomes a sort of a cyclical process, right? Then there's the limited goals aspect to it. I think we already alluded to this a bit, because when you overspend, you are not able to apportion your finances properly to cover long-term goals like education, housing, and investments. Crucial milestones that you would typically want to hit around certain stages of your life. But of course, they become much more difficult because you are only able to do those things based on the finances and the income or the money at your disposal. If those has been drained by unnecessary expenses, then your ability to pursue those goals and achieve them is also compromised. Then there's also this debt cycle where you're dependent on debt to fund your lifestyle, right? You don't have money, so you borrow money to do the things you need to do, and then you have to pay back that money, but you don't have the money to pay it back, so you take another loan to pay it back. And I'm pretty sure, or rather, let me not assume, anyone who is familiar with the with some of the loan offerings available, they can tell that it's highly predatory, right? They give you ridiculous rates in the official on the official, like in the official markets, the regulated markets by the CBN, the MPR rate is currently about 27.5%, to be a bit technical, which means that if you approach a typical bank today and you ask them for a loan, they're going to most likely give it to you at an interest rate in the double digits of maybe about 30 something percent. They're going to pay 30 something percent back as interest, right? Some of these loan apps where people that don't go through the rigorous process that banks do and can just give you a loan maybe within a 24-hour period, their interest rates go, some of them go as high as 60% monthly, 100% monthly, right? Again, it's also important to be financially literate about what these things mean. If you go to a normal bank and you request a loan at 30%, they are giving it to you on an annual basis. So you're going to pay, let's say you borrow 100,000, they expect you to pay that. If that loan runs for a year, you pay 30% of that as an interest. That's as interest on an annual basis. That's 130,000. But if you go to a typical loan app and they give you the interest and you see 30%, but the 30% is monthly, what that means is that on a monthly basis, they are expecting you to pay 30% of the loan. So if you took 100,000, 30% in a month is 30,000. So if you owed that loan and let's say you only owe this for a month and you want to pay back, you are paying 130,000 for having that loan for a month, right? But in most cases, most people owed those loans for much longer. Let's say 2, 3, or even sometimes a year. So multiply 30,000 by 12 months period. That's 360,000 if I'm not mistaken. So you borrow 100,000, but really what you have to pay back is 460,000. So you can imagine that. Why? Because you don't have a solid grasp of your finances to the point where you're desperate enough to pursue some of these loan offerings, and then you end up tied down onto an unrealistic debt burden, right? So it becomes something that can easily spiral out of control, and then you are trapped in a cycle where you are borrowing to repay a loan, and then when that loan comes due, you have to borrow again to repay. It's a very, very dangerous and unhealthy situation to be in. So why do people even get in that situation in the first place? To the point where you've overspent, to the point where you now need to engage in such unhealthy practices. The first is emotional spending. Emotional in the sense that you make, I don't know if in the audience you're familiar with the concept of comfort food, stress eating, stress shopping, all those things. Some people, when they feel down, the next thing that they do to make themselves feel better is to spend. They go on shopping sprees. You pick up your app and you start, ordering whatever you see. You start making orders, right? You're trying to, because when you buy things that you want, there's this it elicits a psychological reward. Not to get too technical, but there are chemicals in your brain, more or less, that speak to things around reward, right? If you are purchasing something you want, you are rewarding yourself. So those chemicals are triggered. I'm going to try to keep it layman so it's relatable, right? So instead of addressing the reason why you are actually stressed or unhappy, you try to go the fast route of just buying something to make yourself happy. But if you keep doing that every time, instead of addressing the situation, and you use spending as a crutch, it's very likely you are going to overspend. Because what that means is that anytime you feel bad, you pick up your wallet, you pick up your app, you pick up your card, and you buy something, even if you are not necessarily able to afford it in the long run, right? There's also the social pressure element. You see everybody else, they are getting this, they are getting that. Maybe somebody is getting the latest phone in town, the latest iPhone. There is nothing wrong with the phone you currently have. But just because there's this element of pressure that everybody else around me is using this, I don't want to feel left out. I don't want to feel like when they were taking group selfies, everybody whips out their phone to record something. I'm the only one that looks odd because I'm using a phone from 5 years ago. But in the actual sense, the phone from 5 years ago, is it not able to do the functions you need it to perform? Can it not make calls? Can it not? Does it? Are you not able to do the things you need to do with a typical phone? right? Sometimes you have to interrogate when you want to make certain decisions, that why are you actually making those decisions? Do they actually make any sense for your situation? Just because everybody else is doing it, you don't know how they are able to be able to afford those things, right? It's not proper for you to just apply another person's situation to yours and try to live to a standard that does not correlate with your own current economic realities, right? There's also the instant gratification aspect, where you want something rather than plan carefully towards attaining it. You take a shortcut and try to get it immediately, right? You want to buy a car. Rather than plan and save properly towards getting a car, you take a loan that you cannot service to buy that car. When the time comes due for you to pay off that loan, can you can you actually undo the additional financial responsibility? Typically, the people that are supposed to give you that loan, they are supposed to do their due diligence and do it on an ethical basis, that they make sure that you even have the capacity to pay it back. So they don't put you in an unrealistic situation. For instance, if you are earning 100,000, if your total income in a month is, let's say, 250,000, right? Why do you want to buy a car worth 20 million naira by loan, by taking out a loan? How are you going to pay back that loan, right? Well, in most cases, nobody's going to give you that loan. But some people, if they want to trap you in a cycle where you basically work your entire life for them, they can go ahead, and then you're stuck. Every penny that you earn, to the point where you borrow, you are repaying it back, just because you decided to go and get something immediately that you should have properly planned for. There's also the cognitive bias aspect to it. Cognitive biases, you can think of them like mental shortcuts, right? That that affect the way we process information, the way we perceive people, and the way we make decisions, right? Where your perception is sort of already influenced by certain factors that don't align with reality. For instance, some of the common cognitive biases that relate to spending, things around the scarcity bias, right? Because you think that this thing you're not going to be able to see it again. Money that you don't have, you spend it trying to get it, right? Because somewhere, somehow, you feel like you're not going to be able to get it again, right? Biases even around things like the availability bias, right? Because something is available, you start to think that it is the best fit for what you need, right? There are other options. There are other options that you could explore, but because this is what is most available, that is the one you stick with, even though and you overlook just how much it costs you. There are so many various cognitive biases that lend themselves to why we do the things that we do, because by their very nature, they don't allow you to make the most rational decisions. And the truth of the matter is, some of those cognitive biases, those ones are held on a personal level, but brands and organizations and businesses, they take advantage of some of these cognitive biases when they do their pricing and marketing, right? That would bring us to the psychological pricing tactics. There is an offshoot. There's a vision is to understand how people act when it comes to consumption, like users, buyers, how they think, how they make their buying decisions, and companies hire consumer psychologists to position themselves in a way to influence you as much as possible to buy. Let me just give you some of the most common tactics that I used. I'm sure uh, maybe just drop in that. Again, I would like to keep this as interactive solutions, maybe Jumia, Konga, you shopped online. Yeah, I think recently Temu is also a recent market entrant. You can just drop in the chat so I know that you're following along. The audience is still with me. Sorry, can everyone hear me? Is everyone still following along? Okay, thanks for the thumbs up, man. We'll get a bit of feedback from the audience at this juncture. If you're familiar with some of the, if you're familiar with some of the, familiar with some of the e-commerce apps like Jumia, Konga, could you just drop something in the chat? I want to make sure that everyone is able to follow the context of some of the things I want to discuss at this point. Uh, okay, I'm not really getting responses, but I believe I should be able to assume that. Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. You make use of Jumia most times. Okay. Well, for those of us that are familiar with those e-commerce sites like Jumia, I'm sure you notice these things they do where you see a price and then they cross it and they show you another price, basically telling you that there is a deal to be had. Maybe the original price is 15,999.99, and then they cross it and then you see 12,500, right? And then usually there's some sort of countdown. That is actually a, a pricing tactic, right? It's a marketing strategy. The idea is to invoke a sense of urgency in you that I need to buy this now. First of all, is a deal, right? I can see that it's on a normal day I would spend 3,000 naira more to get it at 15,999, about 2,000, okay, 2,500 naira more to get at 15,999. They are selling it to me now at 12 or 13,000, right? I'm basically going to be saving money if I buy it now. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of the time, those things, those prices that you are seeing crossed out, those were not the original price in the first instance. Whatever price you are paying for is what the product actually costs. They intentionally put it there, some arbitrary price that is still within the realm of reason, within the realm of believability, if you pardon that language, that you can actually believe that they would have sold it for this price, but they're selling it at this price. But the idea is you are lured into a sense that, oh, you are getting this thing for a cheaper price, so you want to buy it. You might not necessarily need it, but because you also feel like there's a countdown, if I don't buy it now, when I come back, the price is going to be more. So you are pushed to make a decision, to make an impulse decision at that point to buy. That is a strategy on their own end. There's also the point where they employ influencers, social media creators, content creators, to use some of these items, get it up in your face. You are seeing it everywhere. You don't particularly need it, but because somebody you like is using it and is pushing it to you, you start thinking about it differently. That, oh, it wouldn't be nice for me to have it wouldn't be too bad for me to have this. But when you sit down with it and you actually think about it, you realize you don't really need it. It's all those things that just kind of pushed you to make that decision in the first place. So that speaks to the psychological pricing tactics. Organizations always employ this. There are so many avenues that they do this, right? Of course, it's a business. They are there to make profit, right? They are going to make decisions in their own best interest, right? But you just need to be able to be conscious about this fact and make decisions in your own best interest as well. So you are not influenced to make decisions that don't make sense for you at the end of the day. There are also some cultural influences um, that tell on how we spend, right? Things around status symbols, right? So maybe for in your culture, if you own certain things like a mansion or a certain class of cars, it gives you some sort of status, some sort of respect in the society. People start treating you differently. So you might be influenced to pursue those status symbols, even when it is not feasible or sustainable for you. But what you actually need is the respect and the recognition that comes with those status symbols. They are just an intermediating factor. You feel like if you have this, then I would also get the respect and recognition that comes with it, right? There are other avenues for you to get respect and recognition. And even if you don't get it on a wider social perspective, what does it do to you at the end of the day? If people don't hail you when you go into parties because you are not driving a Benz, what do you lose at the end of the day? Perhaps at that point you can interrogate your conception of your self-esteem, how you see yourself, and how how what you place importance on, right? At the end of the day, does it really matter what people think to the point where you make decisions that are not in your best interest? There's also the religious aspects of giving, you know, when you are in certain context and you're expected to give maybe for a certain cause, or perhaps some of the religious obligations like tithes. Yeah, sure, there's nothing wrong in practicing the tenets of your faith and, you know, living according to the according to the requirements of your belief system, right? But you also need to make sure that it doesn't put you in a precarious or dangerous situation. There's also celebrations and generosity. You are at a party, everybody is spraying money, you dip your hands in your pocket, even if all that is in there is your transport money, and you start spraying as well because everybody is spraying money. When everybody is done spraying money and the celebrants pick the money from the floor, you are the one that is going to be stranded on the road trying to find your way home, right? You are the one that is going to be faced with the notion of what am I going to eat for the next 2 weeks. So it's very important that you don't get carried away when you are in all these situations, right? It's good to be generous, it's good to do what you can, but you cannot take care of other people if you cannot take care of yourself. You need to strike a balance and make sure that whatever decision, whatever thing you're doing is also in your own best interest, right? You cannot give out of an empty container, right? You can only give what you have. If you've hit your limit on giving, there is nothing wrong with saying no or even not yet, right? Anybody that is asking of you in a respectable and reasonable manner will understand. And if they don't, well, really, what can you do in that instance? You still need to look out for yourself. So now that we've talked about all the problems, all the influences, what can you actually do, right? What some of the most practical strategies for you? You need to budget and you need to plan. Really, that's the first starting point because you cannot improve something that you don't know. The very first step on that stage is for you to track your expenses. You can do it via a variety of methods, right? You can use from low tech, you can have a diary or some kind of ledger where you note your expenses, all the things that you're spending on, how much you're spending. You can use a spreadsheet. You can use spreadsheet software like Excel, Google Sheets. You can use specialized applications such as Linked Finance, other solutions that might be out there. You can use that to track how much you are spending. When you know how much you are spending, then you can create a budget that prioritizes what you need over what you want, right? If you've budgeted that for transportation, for this month, I need 20,000 for transportation based on the expenses I've tracked in the past. I know that this is how much I typically spend in a typical month. So I'm going to budget within this line. Then once you have created those budgets, right, again, you have to delineate between what you need and what you want. Most of your budget should go towards your needs versus your wants. And under your needs, please have a saving and investment plan in there. Have a budget for saving and investment. It is very, very important. This saying of saving and investing, or more or less, basically saving for a rainy day. I don't know about you, but if you look outside, the weather is always cloudy these days. It's always raining. If you don't have the discipline to have a budget, you are going to keep bringing your umbrella out every time it rains. And one day you will find yourself with a tattered umbrella and you will get drenched. From drenched, you can get carried away and drown. So you need to be very, very careful, right, about your budget, making sure you make a clear difference between what you need and what you want. And then now you can now set goals towards your savings for emergencies that might come up along the way and maybe future projects you might have. Something that could help you to do that, to save properly, set your goals after you've created your budget and tracked your expenses, is also automating your savings, right? You can set up direct transfers to certain accounts, right? You can set it up on a basis where you don't even have to do anything. You set up the plan. Maybe perhaps there's a trigger that when a certain amount of money comes in, a certain amount goes out to this dedicated account, or to this person. It helps you sort of take out the added burden of having to think through the process and having to follow it through. Once you set it up, all you just need to do is make sure that it's running, right? And you can retweak and you can review it as the need may arise. Perhaps your financial circumstances have changed, or perhaps you have new obligations that you want to put through. Again, linked finance also offers a bunch of various options for you to achieve some of the strategies that have been listed here: tracking your expenses, creating your budget, and automating some of your payments, right? I'm sure um, over the course of this session, perhaps the team will be able to give you more insight into that, or you can do your own research as to what is available, some of the services that are available from the linked finance team. So another thing you should also keep in mind is you need to be mindful about your spending, right? When you want to make a purchase, remember I told you that some of these businesses, they design their communications, their marketing in a way that you make an impulse decision, and on the spot decision, even if it is not in your best interest. So sometimes when you want to make certain purchases, right, and it doesn't feel right, take a step back, right? Take a pause, give yourself some time to be removed from that sense of urgency, that sense of hype. Give yourself a bit of leg room, a bit of breathing room to think through the decision. Is it actually right for you? Why do you even want it in the first place, right? Before you now make a decision to buy, you can put it down as a principle that you follow, that when you come across something and you just feel the impulse to buy it, you give yourself a certain amount of time to think through it before you make that actual decision, right? There's also the aspect of avoiding temptation. In psychology, I think I already mentioned this word earlier, triggers, right? One of the things they will tell you when you're coming up with a therapy plan after you've identified the problem is that you identify the triggers. Triggers are the things that tend to, that tend to precede the action. The things that the conditions or the environment where you tend to do certain things, right? So if you know that when you go to certain stores, you get tempted to buy things from there that you don't need, avoid those stores. If you know that if you go to certain apps, you start making purchases that you don't need, avoid those apps. If you know you go to certain gatherings and you spend things on you spend money on things you don't need, avoid those gatherings as much as you can until you're disciplined enough to be able to draw a line, right? Then you can prioritize your memories over your positions, focusing on experiences. Again, because some people they tie they attach so much importance and value to material things, right? When truly what they actually need, what they are actually chasing is more within, right? There are certain feelings, certain mental states that you want to be in, and you sort of use objects and items to shortcut your way to getting into those feelings. You want to feel good, so you buy yourself something to feel good, right? Instead of addressing what you need to feel. Maybe it could be spending time with friends, maybe it could be even just taking a walk, right? Having a conversation with a trusted family member, or just even doing something you enjoy, right? Having a conversation, playing some games, dancing, singing, listening to music. Before you make decision to buy this thing to help yourself feel better, are there other options that are directly address what you actually need in that moment, right? And then of course, finally, seeking support, speaking to a financial advisor, specialist, people that are trained in these matters, that already understand to a certain extent and are able to guide you to making proper decisions, right? Proper decisions in your own best interest, so you can cultivate a healthier relationship with money. So for you to build a sustainable financial future, right? One that where you find some sort of balance, right? You don't feel all over the place in terms of your spending habits. At the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, on your preview cycles, when you balance your books, you come out on top. You are able to afford the things that you need to afford and still be able to plan long term, right? Though that is where you want to be, right? So beyond taking care to make sure that you don't overspend, you also need to make room for building a plan for a sustainable future for yourself. Investing wisely, diversifying your portfolio across various investment options, stocks, real estate, bonds, mutual funds, depending on your risk appetite. Again, there's a lot of research available, there's a lot of materials available online for you to research the options that are suitable for you. Some of these investment options you can get started with as low as 5,000 naira, sometimes even lower than that, 8,000 naira, and slowly build your way up over time, right? There are various options available to you. You can speak to a trusted finance professional or you can do your own research. There are many options available to you. Of course, on the other hand, building a sustainable future, if while you're trying to control your expenses, there's also the end of increasing your income, the amount of money you earn. So look around you. If you need to upskill yourself. If you need to learn or transition or pivot to new career options, more lucrative career options, you could also explore that as well. So you can boost your earning potential. And of course, very very important in your journey towards a more sustainable financial future, you need to make a financial literacy plan for yourself and your family, so you are you are much more well equipped to manage your money better and make informed decisions around your finances, things are and think clearly about your future when you want, like your retirement planning, your pension plan, your insurance, how you manage your health insurance, your property insurance, things around that nature that bear themselves more long term, right? Knowledge is everywhere, right? The materials are everywhere, the resources are everywhere, the expertise is everywhere, but it's up to you to make a conscious decision to actually go after to go after that knowledge and equip yourself with all the tools you need to build a much more sustainable financial future for yourself. So at this point, I have come to the end of my presentation, and I believe I will leave the floor open now. If there are any questions, comments, or any additional information that the team would like to share, I believe I would leave the floor open for that. But thank you very much for the time, and thank you for the audience. I'll leave the floor open now to any contributions from the house, or if the team would like to take over at this junction. Thank you very much.